Conceptualising sex work. Entry into sex work is based on personal choice. Critically assess this statement. This statement claims that the choice to enter sex work is strictly personal. There are no other implications as to why an individual may pursue a career in sex work. It suggests that individuals are free from coercion, monetary constraints, and patriarchal influence when they are making their decision to begin working in the sex industry. What is sex work? Direct sex work involves intimate physical contact of a sexual nature in exchange for money or gifts. This can include prostitution, which is escorts, street workers, and brothels, and also indirect sex work. It does not involve genital contact, but the interaction is still sexual in exchange for money or gifts. This includes lap dancing, stripping, erotic phone sex work, pornography, and online and digital sex work. Both require sexual intimacy in exchange for economical benefit. There are several different feminist perspectives that discuss sex work. Radical feminisms. Pro-positive sex feminism. Sex work reflects violence against and the objectification of women. They are against sex work and for the abolition for sex work. Anti-sex feminism. Sex is an expression of male domination of women. They are also against sex work and for the abolition of sex work. Sex radical feminisms. Sexual libertarianism. Sex work in all forms is empowering and therefore liberating for women. They support sex work and are against the abolition of sex work. Sexual subversion. Sex radicals. Sex work is built in a structure of inequality. Women can use their work as a personal expression to empower themselves. They support sex work and are against the abolition of sex work. The question of choice. The concept of whether a sex worker can have a choice is engaging with the sex industry is debated through multiple lenses of feminist schools of thought. Radical feminism. Choice is structurally impossible. The patriarchy shapes economic and social options for women. Liberal feminism. Choice enables empowerment, is meaningful if legal and social barriers are removed. Marxist feminism. Choice is limited by material condition, class inequality, and capitalist labour markets. Intersectional feminism. Choice cannot be analysed without considering race, class, sexuality, migration status, and gender identity. Queer feminism. Choice is tied to the sexual autonomy and destabilisation of normative sexual roles. Entry into sex work is a personal choice. The statement is a liberal feminist approach to choice in sex work. Liberal feminists support the legalization and regulation to protect sex workers and believe that sex work can be a legitimate labour when consensual. They argue that working with sex workers rather than criminalising them enhances autonomy and safety. Criminalisation harms women by reducing their agency and safety. Consent is meaningful when women have real alternatives, not when they are coerced by law and stigma. Additionally, they reject the idea that sex work is inherently harmful, focusing instead on structural reforms that enable genuine choice. Free choice versus rational choice. Free choice focuses on the consensual exchange of sexual services for money or goods. Workers have the autonomy to choose to engage in sex work. Rational choice, however, emphasises the importance of understanding the context in which sex work occurs and the factors that contribute to a woman's involvement in commercial sex. Critique. Economic constraints. Choosing sex work over starvation is technically a choice, but how free is it really? Many women pursue sex work as it is the only available means to earn money. The desperation that women must change their lives fosters an environment for abusers and traffickers to take advantage of. Luisa, a Colombian woman who worked as a prostitute in Panama to support her family. A man promised more money if she came to work in his clubs in the Netherlands. The man stated she must work to pay him back for all she had owed him. She never saw any of the money despite working 6 days a week, seeing 8 or 9 clients that paid 150 guilders a session. After 8 weeks, she requested her passport back, which the man had stolen, and believed she had paid off her debt. However, he got angry and said that she owed a further 1,500 guilders and beat her with her chair. She then ran away, stating, "If I'd have known beforehand that I would be so abused and have no control over my life, then I never would have come here." Louisa's story demonstrates how easily it is for women who are already involved with sex work to be taken advantage of and then become victims of trafficking. Grasnia, a Polish woman who worked in a restaurant in Yugoslavia after the economic crisis. A man asked her to work in a German restaurant where she would earn 3 times as much. She was interested in the position as the situation in Yugoslavia was becoming more unstable. In a hotel near the German border, she was told she would be working as a prostitute instead. She protested and kept refusing, but then one of the men raped her, whilst another took photographs and threatened to send them to her mother if she continued. She was forced to work as a window prostitute in the Netherlands, and if she didn't earn at least 600 guilders a day, she was beaten and kicked. She sometimes kept the money which she sent to her mother and children back in Poland, but dared not to tell them about her situation. She attempted to escape after a few weeks, but failed. But she did try again and managed to seek refuge with a passerby who took her to a shelter. Greisner's story demonstrates how the economic hardships women face can be exploited by trafficking groups that then force women into prostitution. The choice that women have to enter the sex work industry is rarely one that they make themselves. When they do it, it is typically for economic stability, contrasting with the liberal argument. Economic constraints continued. Marxist feminism. Sex work is rooted within misogyny, male dominance, and the historical oppression of women, and unequal sexual power relations. Prostitution specifically is a material expression of male entitlement, not a neutral market in change. Capitalism assigns women forms of labour that are low paid, insecure, feminised, tied to care, emotion, or sexuality. Prostitution is an extension of this gendered labour hierarchy, where women's bodies become an area of direct purchase. Sex is sold by the oppressed and consumed by the dominant sex, reinforcing the argument that capitalism and the patriarchy are interlocking systems that produce women's subordination. Briggs argues prostitution is not a neutral market of change, as the exchange itself reproduces patriarchal domination. Depending on a gendered hierarchy in which male demand requires sexual availability, sex work alienates social relations between men and women, transforming women into consumable objects whose social existence disappears outside the moment of exchange, associating women with sexual gratification and little more. This results in prostitution not merely being exploitative labour, but specifically a misogynistic social relation. Prostitution is produced through trauma and social domination. Using the labour theory of value, Briggs argues that if exchange value is genuinely reflected in the labour embodied in prostitution, including the risks of assault, PTSD, and murder, commercial sex will be extremely expensive. Prostitution is not aligned with the ordinary contractual labour between formally equal parties. Therefore, the choice is structurally constrained by class relations and sex oppression. Sex work is not a personal choice. It is instead a structural outcome of capitalism and patriarchy, reflecting the material consequence of women's economic subordination. Critique: gender and patriarchy. Radical feminism. Another critique of sex work being a personal choice is how sex work reflects male dominance and female subordination. Andrew Dworkin discusses in the book Pornography, Men Possessing Women, that pornography and prostitution are interconnected institutions that arise from the same patriarchal order and express the same male right to women's bodies. Some of the main arguments state prostitution is not choice but a condition produced by male power. Women's choices are shaped by structural subordination, not autonomy. Pornography depicts women's subordination, whereas prostitution materializes it, and consent is a product of inequality, not genuine freedom. Sex work exists because men hold economic, social, and sexual power over women. It is a freely chosen occupation. It is not a freely chosen occupation, but a manifestation of structured inequality. Women's participation reflects coercive conditions, not genuine autonomy, with the industry depending on women's lack of power, mirroring the dynamics of possession that pornography celebrates. Consent is a survival mechanism within the patriarchal system. Dworkin emphasizes that women's economic vulnerability makes refusal impossible through the quote, When refusal is not possible, consent is a lie. However, Dawkins' arguments can be noted to be somewhat outdated since the book's publication in 1981. Women's rights have progressed further. In the UK, marital rape was recognised as a crime in 1994, and the Domestic Abuse Act recognised coercive and controlling behaviour in domestic abuse cases. Internationally, key legislation such as the Human Rights Act enforce protections for women across Europe. Consent in sex work. Abuse happens to women in sex work whether they consent or not. Melanie was a victim of rape on the street when a regular client saw her distress and offered to take her to his home. He expected sex from her, to which she decides she will ask for money to buy drugs to sleep through the night afterwards. She states, "If this was going to happen, I was going to get something. I can't call that rape because he didn't attack me or force me down. I don't know what I'd call that." The complexity of consent through payment transactions transfers rape into consensual sex in the eyes of others. Sex workers experience societal blame for not being the perfect victim, a myth that is used to blame and discredit survivors of trauma. There is no right way to respond during or after an act of sexual violence, yet society ostracizes sex workers for their participation in structural subordination. The objectification and dehumanization of the female body has allowed consumers and buyers to refuse accountability as they deem to have legitimately acquired consent to unlimited sexual access simply through a monetary transaction, further supporting the radical feminist argument that choices are shaped by structural subordination. Conclusions. Entry into sex work is based on personal choice. Critically assess the statement. Entry into sex work being a personal choice is a disagreement amongst multiple feminist debates. Liberal feminism emphasizes individual autonomy and argues that women should have the right to choose sex work freely, viewing it as a form of labor that can provide independence and empowerment when supported by legal protection and equal rights. Additionally, liberal feminisms discuss the difference between free choice and rational choice, but does not believe that the structural constraints associated with rational choice are as relevant as the legislation and decriminalization of sex work. In contrast, Marxist feminism questions whether the choice is truly free, arguing that capitalism and economic inequality often push women into sex work through financial necessity rather than genuine personal desire. Radical feminism goes further by claiming that sex work reflects patriarchal oppression, suggesting that women's choices are shaped by male dominance and the sexual objectification of women. Marxist and radical feminism both argue male dominance or the patriarchy is interlinked with capitalism and the ways in which women are victims of the system. However, these perspectives are limited due to the outdated nature of some of the debates. They do not discuss the modern methods of indirect sex work that focus on online platforms such as OnlyFans. While all three perspectives engage with the concept of choice, they differ in how much freedom they believe women have within wider social, economic, and patriarchal structures.